Okay, so we're live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for another webinar. This time is going to be a very short webinar. I'm just going to go over like, the kind of questions that you're having. I don't have a presentation in the beginning or anything like that. But just in case you haven't been to any of the previous webinars, the idea of these webinars is so that we can have a conversation, so that you can easily ask questions. Of course, you can ask questions all the time inside the course, inside the Q&A section. But more importantly, I just want to talk with you so that we can clarify if some Scrum questions or any aspects of Scrum that are relevant for the exam or maybe relevant for your professional career or what you're dealing with in your day-to-day situations. If that's somehow relevant, I'm more than happy to discuss that with you, share opinions, and try to get a better understand how things work, or especially how they are supposed to work. Okay, so let's get this webinar rolling. Somebody asked in the group chat, if by taking the course, you can take the PSM-1 exam only by taking the course. And that's definitely true. Doesn't mean that you don't have to put any effort on your side. It's not about like memorizing all the questions or something like that. It's actually a bit of work on your side that you need to put into especially understanding the contents of the Scrum guide, not just browsing through it a bit and then thinking that everything is pretty easy to understand. And the course will take you step by step through everything that you need to know. And especially when it comes to questions, there are so many wrong questions circulating on the internet. And I warned about that in some of the previous webinars. The main idea is you don't need to take tons of questions. Everything that's inside the course is more than enough to, do anything in regards to like passing the exam. It's more than enough. You just need to follow my advice. And I'm more than sure that you will be able to pass the PSM certification without any problems. I think we have someone who has raised his or her hand.
Yeah, this is Ronnie. I would like to start by thanking you. It's a great course. I took my certificate back in April.
Okay.
Just by taking your course, it's amazing, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronnie.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions.
Sure.
So I started to apply it. So I'm moving my company actually from waterfall into agile, and we're building this Scrum. But definitely through the way, there are lots of things during practice that it's hard to align exactly with the Scrum guide, like having the story to be like releasing something that's valuable every month, and not to have something, especially the enablers. So it was one of the Scrum guide that you can't have like sprint zero or having a sprint that will be to build infrastructure and everything has to be in a story that will deliver value. In practice, it's very hard because you need to build actually the infrastructure at the beginning. So I looked into something called SAFE, and they have something called enablers that you can have the design, the architect, and build the infrastructure before you start in the story. So that was my first question. What do you think about something like that? Because according to the exam and the Scrum guide, there is no sprint zero, there is no testing sprint, there is no integration sprint, something like that. Second question, it's asking a favor, actually. Are you going to do any classes about the PMD, the developer? There are things that might be helpful as dev manager is to see how the developers would be working with the Agile Scrum. Thank you so much.
Okay, you don't have to get off. It's the idea is to also have a conversation. I think you already went out. I wanted actually to ask you like what kind of a product you are building. But the main idea in Scrum, with not having a sprint zero and not having like release sprints or like testing sprints or things like that, is to really point out some issues that are with the organization or the way software, if we're talking about software, how software is being built. Because if you want to use Scrum, but at one point you notice that you need to change things internally or that things don't match what you want to do. Of course, it's inconvenient, but part of the change process is to have something that is inconvenient. If everything was to be easy, then it wouldn't be inconvenient and you wouldn't actually think about the processes and the things that you are building. Now, when it comes to infrastructure, nobody said, or architecture or things like that, nobody said they don't bring value. They do bring value. It's a different kind of value that they bring, but they're just as important. And it is expected that in the beginning, in the sprints, when you're just starting off with a project, and it's many organizations, it's not something very simple. It's not a simple app that can be done in a few weeks. There are complex projects, and definitely I can understand that. The main idea is not to have a disconnect where you're working on architecture and working on architecture and working on architecture, and at the same time you're staying disconnected from the stakeholders and from people who can give you feedback on how things are going. So what Scrum is saying indirectly in regards to that is that, of course, in the beginning, you will build less business functionality, but it's still important to build some business functionality, even if it doesn't reach a lot of users, or if maybe it doesn't reach any users, only the stakeholders can see it. It's still important to have like this flow of, with every sprint, having something that's potentially releasable. And especially it's something that at the end of the sprint, in the sprint review meeting, you can look at it and say, okay, this is not a lot, but it's still something. And, we're happy to have some functionality that we can play around with and try it out and see how it feels. And then maybe get some input back into the product backlog. If you're only building infrastructure and like end users or any stakeholders don't get like any idea, like how does this thing look like? Can we use it? No, not yet. Then you're kind of this is why you're against the Scrum principles, because you're not closing the feedback loop. You're not getting any feedback. Maybe working on architecture for 2 or 3 months, and then later when you start building functionality, you may notice that maybe the architecture is not as it should be. So this is the Scrum idea. Of course, you're working a bit more in the beginning for the architecture, but later on, you're doing other things as well. You're improving the architecture as you go along. Now, also, since you mentioned enablers from SAFe, as far as I know, it's also about, of course, supporting like building the architecture, but at the same time, it's also important to build that business value. So it's not only about architecture. And I think you had like a lot of questions, but since you got off, I'm not sure I answered all of them. So I apologize for that. Feel free to raise your hand again. But I'm gonna take here another question now from Pablo.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hi, Pablo. How are you?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you very much. I'm really good. Actually, it's an interesting question. The other colleague did, and I kind of can relate to that with my next question because it was more regarding the sprint planning. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm preparing the exam actually. So looking at the Scrum guide, it seems like during the sprint planning, the development team has to come up with a plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, does it mean this plan is actually, I don't know, for example, a solution from a architectural point of view? It doesn't really have to be something you can deliver from a code, something like that, like a really functionality, but can be only a solution on how we want to build the infrastructure, for example, or the architecture of the system. So it doesn't have it has a value, but not something concrete that you can actually deliver to and release to the end users.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think it's also related to the question before.
That's a good question. The thing with the plan is that it's not, the plan itself is not delivering that value directly. So it goes the other way around. The value comes from implementing a specific product backlog item where the product owner already established that there's value into doing that. So now the developer team goes to the next step and like tries to figure out what are the individual steps needed to accomplish that. Let's take like a more general example. Let's say a product backlog item is building a house. And in the sprint planning meeting, the development team will sort of like try to think about, okay, we are building a house. Okay, how big is it? And this is something that maybe it's in the description. It should be for 2 persons. They start thinking, okay, we need windows, we need insulation, we need a roof, we need doors, do we need furniture as the product owner? Product owner, do you think this is like included, or can we update the description? No furniture needed, only the structure. Good. So this is like kind of this is the plan. It's like a breakdown of what needs to be done, so that at the end of the sprint, that product backlog item is done. In the case of a house, it's done when somebody can move in. That would be like the thing. With a house, when you're building software, of course, there are the criteria that decide what done is. But when building the plan, what to do, and even these architecture decisions, of course, this is the plan. So this is the decision of the development team how to build something. It's the decision of the development team when building the house. To follow up in my example, whether to use bricks, wood, or anything else, that fulfills the criteria as described in the product backlog item for that. So just to make this analogy. Oh, does that make sense? Does this answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Then I have a second question. Is like,
sure.
So let's say a user story, right? In your example, a user story might be build a house, right?
Yes.
So what if the complexity of also the estimation of the user story, it's too big, it doesn't fit into the sprint capacity, for example?
Well, it definitely depends the point in time when this happens. So ideally, you would notice that still during the sprint planning meeting, and you could still change something about that, or even before sprint planning, if the development team, and this is something that happens in time, you get a feeling how big things are, and as you go along. But of course, it's not the end of the world if you notice during the sprint, this product backlog item, this user story is too big. It's not going to be done into the sprint. The normal process is to look at what is the sprint goal for the sprint, and what can we change about the work that we have selected in order to make it doable, in order to reach that specific sprint goal. And of course, this can only happen with the development team and the product owner collaborating. Now, even if work in the sprint is not done, even if the sprint goal is not reached, it's not the end of the world. Scrum doesn't end at that point. After each sprint, there is the sprint retrospective. And in the sprint retrospective, the development team, the product owner, and the Scrum Master will look back at the sprint that they are just about to end, and will try to figure out, okay, why did this sprint fail? What has happened? How can we make sure that it doesn't happen again? This is the learn process. This is why in Scrum, the sprint retrospective is super important. And of course, all these events are connected with one another. This is part of the process. You cannot always know in advance everything. You cannot avoid sometimes failure from the beginning. This is sort of like the calculated risk that you take. This is why sprints have a specific length, so that whatever happens, you're not wasting too much time, or after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 1 month, you're looking back at what has happened. Then you can take other decisions compared to working at the architecture for 3 months and noticing only after 3 months that something isn't right. Do you still have any other questions? Otherwise, I will go back to Ronnie.
Yep, thank you.
Hi, welcome back. Sorry for earlier. You asked so many questions, and sometimes it's hard to manage different ideas that are flowing through my head and all the questions that you had.
Yeah, but you answered. The first one very well. The second one is: are you going to do the PMD certificate?
Yes.
About PMD certificate.
So the idea with the developer certificate is that it is on my to-do list, but overall, so far it hasn't been like a huge interest in taking this course and taking the certification. And because creating a course actually takes much more time and energy than watching one by a factor of maybe 50 or 100, I don't want to complain, but creating online courses is really, really time consuming. So I have a lot of ideas in regards to what I'm going to do next, and I can even share like what are my plans. So in terms of plans, I'm working currently at psm-2 certification course. After this, it's coming a pspo-2 course, and after these two courses are done, I will decide between doing the developer certification and or doing the scale Scrum certification. So it's definitely on the list, but because it takes a bit of time to get everything up and running, it may take a bit, and especially the developer certification, it is hard because so far, and this is something I also like need input from you guys. I'm a developer, so I know a lot of technical terms. But at this point, I wouldn't know exactly how to create a course if I would create a course for existing developers and only like explain the Scrum parts and how development and Scrum come together, or if I have to go into development topics and explain things like unit testing on and everything like that. Um, are you a developer, or why are you interested in this particular certification and course?
Yeah, I'm a dev manager, so yeah, I'm a developer by heart. Not by heart. I mean, I have a master in computer science,
Okay.
and I've been a developer, for a while. So there are development challenges for the Scrum, especially the estimates. You're talking about it like the TDD, test-driven development.
Mm-hmm.
How can you test? Being able to do like some concepts maybe from the extreme programming as well. So there are challenges that, as you know, even the exam and the Scrum guide doesn't answer how the development team, it's just about self-organized. So there are some challenges. I don't know how to be able to estimate. How can I self-organize the team to be able to deliver something? How can I do the, as you said, the unit testing, the test-driven development, building a test framework, decide on how can you build the framework? The question that Paulo was just saying, actually, it's one of the challenges I'm facing at work. And you asked about what type of work I do. It's delivering end-to-end systems, websites.
Okay.
So I would like also, in addition to what Paulo said, but to finish only the PMD. So those are the things that are needed. And I think most of the people that are asking for this certificate will be developers. So I think they will be familiar with the development terms. Your courses are great. I mean, this is the best course. I've tried other courses as well. And
Thank you very much.
Clearly and in a practical way. I'm still using your course as well through work, go back and forth into it. So I was looking for something that good actually for the same certificate for PMD.
Okay.
And for my developers as well, for the team, I wanted to pointed them to your course so they can understand the new concepts and change how they work. But they come into challenges that the Scrum Guide doesn't answer, actually, because it doesn't details how the development team would be able to deliver.
Yeah. So on that idea, I'll definitely would be very glad if you could send me a message and we can talk about more about this course. And I'll definitely need some like ideas and input from you. The way I create courses more recently is by also using sort of like an agile approach with small increments and not building something from scratch and then putting it out there. So definitely, I'm generally interested in anyone else who's like planning to take the developer certification from scrum.org. Overall, send me a message and we'll keep in touch, and you will get early access to whatever I'm building on in regards to this topic. Another idea that I just wanted to get out is that Scrum is in the end a framework, and what it means is that it doesn't address many questions that happen in practical terms. So it just lays the foundation, and there are many other approaches, techniques, or even frameworks that can be added on top of Scrum to solve individual problems. So the reason why Scrum isn't that restrictive is because what may work for one team doesn't work for another, or what works for a product doesn't work for a different one. And also, maybe Scrum is not the answer to everything. So there are projects where you're really dealing with complex work and you're really dealing with a lot of uncertainty and you really need these quick feedback loops. But maybe you have also more stable projects where, as you sort of like mentioned, you already know the architecture from the beginning because things don't change so much and things are not so dynamic. And in that case, maybe, just maybe, Scrum is not the best framework to accomplish that work. So you always need to think like, what's the best tool, what's the best framework or things to do the work that is required. I'll also take some other questions.
Yeah. So my question to you, I think you kind of answered it earlier that you were working on the PSPO2 course. So I wanted to ask you, how different is it from PSPO1? And the second question I have is in the earlier somebody was mentioning that they have taken the your course and they were able to complete or take the exam and successfully pass it.
Yes.
I've taken your course and I know I've talked to you before also. It's just that sometime when I take the test, I still feel like that there could be still more content out there or more material out there somewhere where I can maybe take some help. There are so many websites, so many posts, so many articles. So do you think that taking your courses a couple of times, reading the Scrum guide, do you think anyone can be prepared after that? And I mean, you mentioned that we don't need to remember your questions, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Answer your assessments or the assessments that are out there.
Yeah, so the main idea is that, yes, indeed, the course contains everything that you need in order to pass the Scrum.org PSM-1 certification. And the reason for that is you need to understand the Scrum Guide. And the thing with reading additional content is that if the Scrum Guide is not clear enough in order to understand the connections between the development team, all the roles, all the rules, everything that's happening within Scrum, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to go into additional material, because if you know the contents of the Scrum Guide, that is enough to pass the certification. Now, I'm not saying that the course will teach you everything that you need to know about Scrum. Scrum is a super complex topic, and as you have seen from the previous students, there are a lot of questions and many things that Scrum doesn't address. So I'm not saying by any means that the Scrum is like the Bible of everything that you need to know, but is to the point in terms of what is needed for the exam itself. It contains everything you need to know. It goes through the questions and try to point out the areas where something may not be clear. So for that reason, this is why I'm saying the course is definitely enough. And some of the lectures may also include some resources or things that you can check. If you want to read additional material, search or look into the scrum.org blog posts, because they go deeper into some topics. But those topics and the way that they are explained and the depth of the information that is there is not really required for the exam. So I would only do that if you would have the time to explore that deeper. What I generally recommend is, take the exam, pass it, and then, of course, continuously invest more time into understanding Scrum, into reading more, reading some books, and maybe preparing for the PSM2 exam if you're really interested in Scrum.
Yeah.
If your goal is no, I just want to take this certification, it looks good on my profile, and after that I want to move on, that's totally fine as well. In essence, this is what the course delivers. The PSPO1 certification is very, very similar with PSM1. There are a lot of overlaps. It's just a bit harder than PSM1, but the contents, 80-90% of the contents and the questions are still based on the Scrum Guide. There's only one additional guide, the EBM guide, that's relevant for PSPO1. But apart from that, a lot of students decide to take both exams, especially in the order of PSM and after that PSPO1.
Yeah, I'm working on PSPO1 without taking PSM1 because that is what recommended to me by my organization that I should take.
That's fine as well.
Yeah. So just to summarize what we have just discussed is, as soon as I can complete your courses and read through the Scrum Guide a couple of times, your assessment is I'm marking like close to 95% in your assessments. You think I'll be ready to take the exam?
Yes, and if you have some additional time, I would definitely recommend looking at any of the previous webinars, especially one of the first webinars. I really talked a lot about exam tips and how to approach the exam, and also how to be better prepared for exam, so that you know what to expect and there are no surprises. We also have Will here trying to ask a question.
Hi, Valentin. Thank you for taking my question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to say kudos for your courses. It really is the best out there.
Thank you very much, Will.
You've got a lot of tips. Somebody who goes through the courses, if anyone is on the fence or has not, please do so, and you will be able to pass the exam. My question was, I think you already answered it, which is working on the next step of the psm-2 and the pspo-2, which is what you said you're working on. Another reference to the PSD. I passed the PSD, so if any developers on the line is interested in taking the PSD, I think you'll be able to pass it. It's not a difficult exam. Because it's going to be it's not going to get too much details on how things gets done. It's just understanding the frameworks and some of that stuff, tying it to test first and some of those general things that developers work with. And I could not agree with you more. I think you're not going to find as many people who are going to get into the PSD courses and certification as the psm-2 and the pspo-2 and the scale Scrum. I think that's better time if I were just making courses for the sake of not sake of courses, but to educate more and get more people to get more certification. I think I would spend more time on those instead of the PSD, because like I said, it's easy exam to pass. If you go over the reading material and take a couple tests and go around and read a couple books, you should be able to pass that. And that's coming from somebody who's not even a developer.
Yeah. Will, we're sort of like running out of time. Do you have a question?
No, you already answered it. Thank you.
Okay. You're more than welcome. Now, let me ask you something. What is the value that you got from the PSD exam? Did it help you professionally? Because this is like kind of what a lot of people are asking themselves when taking an exam, when passing a certification.
Unless you're a developer, I would just pass on that exam. I would not even attempt to take it. It really did not. I mean, it sort of like helps. What should you do, and what's the extreme programmer versus other types of testing techniques that are out there available to developers, and it will help. I'm not saying it's not, but if the goal is to be in the area of product master or coach, probably it's not something that I will spend as much time on.
Okay, thank you very much for your input. I really appreciate that, and I think that's also helpful for any other of you who are thinking about the certification, really to put in balance the time and money invested and what are the benefits, especially for someone who is a developer in taking that. So really appreciate your input there. We're getting very close to the end. It's as I said in the beginning, it's going to be a very short meeting today, but I'm super glad that there were so many questions. I will quickly go over, I think, one or two questions that appeared in the chat. Somebody, I think Tanya, was asking about the psm-2 exam. It would be great if you could send me a message. As I mentioned previously, I'm working on a psm-2 course. Will be available very, very soon, but I'm still offering early access to a few students who already passed the psm-1 exam with a high score. So definitely reach out, or any of you who are willing to take the psm-2 exam. psm-2 generally, in a nutshell, is that it is much harder. The content that you need to learn, it's practically still the same, but it goes into a lot of details. And that's going to be covered in the course. So I'm super excited that so many of you have managed to come for this webinar. Meanwhile, if you're preparing for the exam, good luck, and let me know your exam result, and we'll stay in touch. Have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.